Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the British Friends of Mayanei Hayeshua Medical Centre, I'm delighted to welcome you to this live Zoom event. My name is Dr. Rosalind Landau. I am the co-chair of the British Friends and your host for this evening. The coronavirus pandemic has resulted in a huge change in social interaction between families and friends. This is due to a number of factors, including the fear of passing on or catching the virus, the various lockdowns, and the shielding of vulnerable adults and children. Tonight, I have the privilege to introduce Professor Rael Strous, Clinical Director of the Mayanei Hayeshua Mental Health Centre and Professor of Psychiatry at the Sackler Faculty of Medicine, Tel Aviv University, who will be discussing these various issues. Professor Strous is an internationally renowned psychiatrist and is of the firm belief that mental illness is absolutely treatable. If you have any questions during the evening, please use the live chat button. Professor Strous will address as many of them as possible in the time available. So without further delay, I pass you over to Professor Strous. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros. It's a wonderful honor and pleasure to be with you all this evening. Some good things about Corona, if one can say, that it's connected us around the world in ways that we never thought would be possible and feasible and even enjoyable at times. But it's definitely a pleasure to talk about. And the subject tonight is not an easy one, but an important one, and something that that we need to address. You know, when people talk about the corona and COVID-19, the knee-jerk response is always to talk about the physical aspects of it and the physical morbidity of the illness. And I think that both short-term and long-term mental health issues are becoming to be more prominent focus of interest to many for a number of reasons, and I think for that is that what you want to address tonight. I guess, you know, when people talk about COVID, when they talk about the psychiatric aspects, there's a whole wealth of information that's coming to the fore now regarding the neuropsychiatric aspects of coronavirus and what COVID-19 does on a physical level. But it's not that I want to discuss. That's a whole new subject on its whole new other subject on its own. But the anxiety and the affective response or the mood response, I think is something that we're seeing all around us. And we all, if we haven't been affected by ourselves, people close to us have been affected, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Regarding the anxiety response, as you can hear my accent, I come from Africa, and just like all those who've grown up in Africa, when you're in the middle of a jungle and there's a lion chasing you, it's a normal response to feel anxiety, because if you don't feel anxiety, you won't run away from that lion. But the problem is, if you feel too little anxiety, you don't move and the lion eats you up. If you feel too much anxiety, you freeze, the lion eats you up, not good. And if you go into the local grocery store to buy some milk and you feel as if the lion is running after you, that's also not a good thing, so because there's no lion there. So too little anxiety, too much anxiety, and anxiety not in the right place becomes dysfunctional. But anxiety in itself is not a bad thing. It's a way that helps us respond to situations. The problem is that in response to a massive crisis, the proverbial black swan, which we're all going through, the anxiety response of people is usually, in many situations when it's dysfunctional, too much or not in the right place. And that can lead to a range of anxiety responses regarding panic, phobias regarding various things, obsessive behavior, and even a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. There's no question that is an aspect of the way people are responding. And at times it can lead to catastrophic responses and affect so many aspects of people's lives. And it's in so many different ways. And that is usually related to someone who's already coming into the COVID virus or the COVID-19 pandemic with an emotional load in a vulnerable state. So what happens is that the COVID-19 pandemic affects vulnerable people beyond their point of resistance, leading to some kind of severe stress reaction, depression, and in very severe circumstances, and relatively rare though, suicide and self-harm and even psychosis. So sometimes due to underlying psychological issues, people sometimes do the opposite response. Instead of looking at the over response, they have the under response. They don't respond enough, and that's often related to certain underlying personality issues, and that can also be dysfunctional. So I think that looking in terms of the lion in the forest, I think that really describes a many different range, and in a nutshell, the range of responses that people are reacting with the stress that may, in certain circumstances, trigger the mental illness. So why is this? What are these emotional responses due to? Why is the emotional response to the COVID crisis so profound and so all-encompassing in many circumstances? So I think that one can propose a number of things. First of all, the loss of routine. We all need routine. Routine gives us stability, and the COVID crisis has destroyed all form of routine, and it picks, and particularly because many of us don't really know what's happening in terms of the next response of the government. That's what many people are feeling where I'm coming from in Israel. There's this fear of death, and the fear of death has become very close to us, and we like to think that death is a predictable thing. It's like happens to people towards the end, in elder age. Whereas here we're seeing people much younger and sometimes in the 50s and 60s being hit by the virus and being very sick. There's this feeling of being helpless, that there's no treatment, that's not even able to prevent in many circumstances, because we don't know where this infection is coming from. It's this dread of the unknown. The rules have changed. This black swan has descended upon us, and people are feeling very overwhelmed from that. And then there's a fear of isolation. Those who have to go into isolation is very, very difficult. The isolation issue is something that can throw people just in itself. Isolation is something that, a person is a person through other persons. We're only human due to our relationships with others. So when we go into isolation, and not just isolation because we've been exposed, isolation from our community, isolation from our friends, so many circumstances, isolation from our work, which is really what people is the building blocks of our society. Going to work, having a community, being with friends, and that is very, very traumatic. So on one hand, one can say isolation has its interesting parts of it. Isolation, Franz Kafka said that isolation is a way to know ourselves. But we need other people to be us, to be people. We define ourselves many times in terms of how we are with other people, and we are losing that in the COVID crisis, and that is throwing many people off. And then there's this fear of maybe I won't get the help that I need. So besides the fact that many medical services are downsizing or are limiting, maybe at least initially only in terms of more severe cases, people are not getting follow-up, people are not getting routine follow-up, people are scared to go into the clinics to get help for things that they would get in the help, and little problems become bigger problems. From the mental health perspective, for sure there's less mental health services when we should be having even more of it, and it's less accessible, and people don't know how to get that help, and that's very, very, very difficult for them. That can be very scary. And then there's the stress of people being at home, on family on top of each other, and parents being stuck between various generations, and that's maybe something we can talk about a little bit later. There's the financial stress, there's the stress of the unemployment, relationship issues that suddenly people are thrown together in houses during lockdown and it can lead to frustration and even, unfortunately, violence. And we're seeing that there's more family violence in certain situations in those that are already vulnerable. So it's not something that just comes out of left field that there was never any basis for. These are usually in situations where there's already a vulnerable situation, and that just becomes the stress, what we call the stress diathesis model, that there's an underlying susceptibility to a lot of these problems, and this is just throws people off. You know, Kubler-Ross speaks about the stages of loss. And you know, she responded, she was talking about loss when people hear about severe terminal illnesses. But I think that the stages refer to loss in many different circumstances. And I think that this is one of those circumstances par excellence that her stages apply to. And we know that when people are in the stage of loss for so many aspects of their lives of where it used to be a year ago. And sometimes, you know, the people respond to those different stages in abnormal, dysfunctional manner. For example, denial. Those who, you know, people may be in denial of what's going around, and therefore don't keep to the rules and don't keep to responsibilities that one should have for others when we go out shopping or even at work, and then come back home and then affect our families or in schools, for example. And that's something, and people, you know, the responsibility, the locus of control is external. It's other people's issues. It's another person's place to deal with. It's the government that should be making better. It's the community. It's the municipality. But where's me in here? And that's a problem. So those with the psychological dimension of some kind of external locus of control will put the efforts and the responsibility in others to reduce and avoid infections, and not me. And that's a problem. And then there's something else that's coming to the fore right now, which is really fascinating. And we're seeing this now. You know, this all started happening in February, March. And, you know, this has been going on for now like a good 9-10 months. So there's this concept now they're talking about in the literature of pandemic fatigue. And the World Health Organization said this is affecting 60% of the people around the world who haven't had to deal with this for 10 months. And this is related to intense frustration that people are feeling, that this is still going on, and the financial stress and the social stress and the community stress and the family stress and is massive. And people are getting tired. And that's a whole nother wave. When they talk about the second wave or the third wave, people like to talk about the infection waves. But what about the mental health waves? And we're seeing this now in the second or third wave, this pandemic fatigue. And this is on the basis of so much that else has been going on at the same time. So, and then there's obviously we talk about the different generations and the children, and I'm not sure if that's something, Roz, that you would like me to expand on. So there are many different issues that are coming up from the mental health perspectives, and then there's a question: is how do we deal with this stuff? You know, how do we manage this first within us? And how do we manage this with those in the middle ages, dealing with the children and then the elder, our parents, and with I think one can look at really 4 different generations or 4 different age groups that are having to deal with this, and the issues are very different. And I think that one can put them into categories of children, number 1, adolescents and young adults, number 2. Then the middle-aged adults, and then the elderly adults. And the issues are very different in all these different age groups.
Can you outline the mental health effects of the isolation on each group, Professor Strous?
So that's what's fascinating. As I mentioned, the issues are different, and each of them are having to deal with it in a different way. So children in crisis, the isolation is expressed. Many of them are not going to school, and they're losing the connection to their friends and their teachers. And it's phenomenal to see children yearning for their school and yearning to be back with their friends. It's so critical that to lose a year in the young is profound. There's a whole lot of literature that as you get older, time seems to go faster. Time seems to fly. And there's even a neurological underpinnings and explanation for that. But we don't have time to go into that today. But for a child, a year, 10 months, 6 months is you don't see the bigger picture. So that's all that's in. That becomes their life. So they're losing their connection to the friends and teachers. They're losing their manner to express that connection of being together with each other. This loss of hugs, the loss of routine for children is very difficult. The loss of freedom for a child just to go out and just to be. The loss of discipline. School is very important in terms of discipline. And now, just, there's the hours here and there, and they're going to sleep late, and the parents are stressed, or the parents aren't around, or the parents are busy dealing with their stuff, and there's one computer or two computers for 5 or 6 kids, and this is very difficult. And then there's the loss of respect for stability of the authority. The children want stability from the elder generation and from the parents and from people in authority. And that's not there anymore, because the parents we can't give our children stability during COVID because we don't have stability. And we really don't, we're not in control, which is a great leveling experience and awareness for us as adults. But children need stability, and they don't have that now from the adult generation. And what is that going to do to them? Because a lot of this stuff cannot be made better so quickly. The loss of financial stability in many families. Parents are stressed, those who have economic instability, and some of the others have improved economic stability because just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, and then that causes further issues because they haves and they have not, because just everything just changed. And then a very, very important issue also with children is the loss of connection to grandparents. Grandparents give something to children that their parents don't, and their parents can never give. And that unjudgmental, non-disciplinating, just full of love. And they don't have that now because the grandparents cannot come and give them that hug and be with them and do with them. And even if they're in the same cities, they can't give it. And for sure, those who can't travel. And so many grandparents are stuck at a distance, and that's a very difficult. And grandparents are scared, and we'll talk about that maybe soon. And we're not talking necessarily even about grand families. The concept of grand families, that these are families in which grandparents and other extended family members perform typical parental duties, for those, staying away from the children to reduce their potential exposure is just not an option, or incredibly difficult and dangerous. But sometimes they have to do it, and so that's a big thing. And then what about the adolescents and the young children, the young adults? They have also intense frustration over not being able to see their friends, and sometimes they just say, I can't deal with this anymore, and they do it. And then they have this guilt, they're going out with their friends, and they tell their parents that they're keeping their distance and their mask, but they don't, because the children feel invincible and they don't keep to the social distancing, even though they say to themselves often that they do. But I like to go out and to watch and observe. They're not keeping it. And then they're coming home and they're not sharing what they're doing, but they definitely are putting people at home at risk. And that for them is difficult, but they can't help it in many situations. And many of them have taken on very unhealthy habits, the way that they're learning, the way that they're not sleeping, the loss of routine. So as parents and grandparents, we have to validate this disappointment that they're undergoing. We have to encourage family projects, family time. Often dinner time, for example, should be a transition time between the school day that the children and adolescents are having in the evening. Dinner should be a wonderful time to gather the whole family together, to talk, to share a meal, to have some, conversation, talk about their favorite part of the day. I believe very much in sacred space. There are areas in the house, in the home, that should be sacred space with no technology, no screens. I'm not very popular with my children and at times with this, but I believe, for example, there should be, for me, everyone should set something for themselves. But for me, I believe there are 4 places that there should be no screens. I believe in the kitchen, the dining room, the bedroom at night after a certain time, and most importantly, I think the car. I think the car should be sacred space, no screens. That's the time that we can connect with our adolescents or young adults family members and talk with them. But when they're sitting on their screens, because that's the time that's their like go-to place, it's a problem. But we have to use every opportunity we have. And then for the grandparents who are feeling that they don't have that connection or are scared, we can intensify grandparenting in many novel ways, especially with grandchildren, where grandparents used to be very much involved. And virtual time together can be a wonderful gift between grandchildren and their grandparents. But it takes effort and takes creativity and takes you have to invest time in that. It can be a wonderful gift. It's now part of life. So for example, grandparents can spend time every night reading together with the grandchild. Grandchildren can still give meaning in lives to their grandparents, but just with a different medium. Grandparents have wonderful wisdom, and the grandchildren are thirsty for that, and they can do common projects together. There's so much that can be done in a creative way. And I think that I think the message here in life is not what happens to us that's so important, but how we deal with it is more important. We have no control many times what happens to us, and for sure we have no control of the fact that this COVID virus came out from nowhere and has affected our lives in such a profound manner. But what's important is how we deal with what happens to us. That is critical. So we can encourage and help children manage the children here. And even our peers, we can engender a manner of dealing with adversity in a way that real life has taught them to do, and they can learn so much in that. Children learn from how we deal with stress and crisis for how they deal with it, and I think that's something very important, that we can help and teach children how to do that. So if we deal with stress, we deal with stressful situations in a manner that's very difficult for us, children learn from that. So once again, it's not what happens to us, but how we deal with it. So if children see us dealing with these crises in a very mature manner, they will pick that up and they can learn from that. This is a manner for them to learn how to deal with adversity in a very mature way. And that they pick up from us, how we deal with that. But mostly in ways that we don't say, okay, we're not going to teach you. They see how we're dealing with it and they learn from that. And it can be a wonderful learning experience, something that's in some ways, in many ways, priceless.
It's very helpful. Thank you. One of the things that's been encouraged here, certainly in England, and I'm not sure so much in Israel, is this sense of community during lockdown, certainly in the first lockdown. Do you think that we are really taking on this responsibility to others, and does that make us naturally better people?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity, exactly that I think we can take upon ourselves to say, okay, the community and everything's in a crisis right now. The question is how we deal with it. It's an opportunity to teach those around and to show those around us, friends, family, other community members, to get together. If there's any time that we need to be together, it's in dealing with crises like this. It's interesting, from my perspective as a doctor, 3 years ago, the international medical oath doctor's oath was changed. They added 3 new things. One of them was to respect autonomy of patients. In other words, it's not the doctor that decides. Number 2, a doctor should look after themselves in order to help the patients. But the third one, and the most important one, I think, is that doctors now have an ethical duty, not just to treat patients in the treatment room opposite from them, where they're treating, in other words, their patients, but also doctors have an ethical duty to share their knowledge with the community, which means that in times of crisis, especially, if a doctor is just treating the patient in their treatment room who's coming to them in the clinic, they're not doing their ethical job on its own as a doctor. A doctor now has an ethical duty to go out and share their knowledge with the community. If there's any time where the doctor needs to do that, it's now. And I'm saying that kind of ethical duty doesn't just necessarily apply to doctors, but I think it's something that all of us should take upon ourselves to say, okay, we do not live in a bubble. And not only does that does it help the others when I go out and extend myself to those around me and be more sensitive? But it makes me a better person. And I think that that's a responsibility that people in this crisis should be taking cognizance of. Because there's no question that when one extends oneself and helps others, one is helped, if not just as much, if not more. And that's something also that our children will learn from. When our children see that we in the situation, we can't just sit in our bubble and just deal with our, dala damot, our area around us, but going out and extending ourselves to others, it's not, it actually helps us manage the situation in a better way. It's back to Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, it's not what happens to you that's so critical, but how we deal with it, because we have no control how we deal with it. But if one of the ways we deal with it is actually extending to our outside, that makes a phenomenal difference, not just to our outside, but to ourselves. And the children pick that up. The parents, when they stress, but they use that situation in a positive way to help others. Children pick it up. My wife was a refusenik, and she talks about it sometimes in the last few years. And the question is always asked her. She said, "What was it like growing up as a child, as a refusenik?" And they were refuseniks for 9 years, and it wasn't easy. And she always says, as a child, she did not realize the stress. The parents may have been stressed, but they were out there helping others in the community. But and because of that, it's not, they didn't feel, my wife didn't feel the stress of being a refusenik, because her parents were always out there in the community, and the community was together, and the community was dealing with their identity crisis as Jews wanting to leave, the Soviet Russia in those days, and the children can still be happy. This is the situation, okay, and the question is, how do we deal with it? And don't be scared to talk about it. Don't be scared to share concerns. Show the processes of how to deal with it. This can be an opportunity, and that's a focus, that's a challenge, to use this crisis as an opportunity, not just for our children and our parents, but most importantly for us. How can we use this opportunity to come out of this in a better way, not just as us as individuals, but most importantly, perhaps, as a community, because it works both ways. We become better, our community becomes better, and that helps us also. So it becomes this loop of symbiotic relationship of positivity.
Obviously, there's a lot of financial issues going on at all levels, but do you think that's causing a division in the different generations, and that's causing any mental health issues as a result of that?
Look, the financial stress is something that's out there, and once again, it's how one deals with it. But it's a reality. Unfortunately, it's a reality, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk about it. For example, I think that when people are feeling stress, and it's okay to validate our own feelings and to validate other people's feelings, and to reassure people who are concerned about this in our families that things will be okay. So when parents have lost their jobs, and children may feel the stress or the financial, or because they are downsizing with families, and families are not doing what they used to and can't always buy what they used to, and definitely we can't go out and do what we used to because of the limitations that are out there, validate feelings and frustration. It's okay to feel it's okay to sometimes have a breakdown and be upset and cry and express frustration. It's okay. But then once again, reassure that things over time will be okay. And they actually really will be okay. Invite people and people around to share feelings, express how you're feeling as well, and show it's okay to express doubt and frustration and anger and sadness and insecurity. It's okay. But the wheel always turns, and having a bad day is not a bad life. So once again, this is a way of managing adversity, and we encourage how to deal with it. So children and peers learn how to deal with stress and sudden change, and this could be the most important learning experience of members of our families' lives. And we just shouldn't drop the ball. COVID is going to go away. The question is it going to go away and we're going to be a better place? Because some people will be in a better place. And I'm not talking about the financial, because the financial situation also will get better. But how are we going to come out of this as better people, as better parents, as better children to our parents, as better community members, as better co-workers? How are we going to come out of this better? That's a challenge, because everyone is going to come out of it. The question is, that's what makes people, certain people special and others not. So in life, once again, it's not what happens because we can't no control, but how we deal with it is what's important. And I'm just going back to Viktor Frankl again. He said, when we're no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's very profound. Once again, we can't change it, but we are challenged to change ourselves. And how can we use this opportunity to come out as better people? And people have done incredible things in this time. There's amazing things that some people are doing with their creativity. And all it takes sometimes to sit down and sometimes in the context of our families or with our friends, and to connect and to brainstorm. So how can we deal with the situation in a better way? Do you know that once I saw a study that said, what are the two things that most predict long life in middle-aged people? So when you take a group of middle-aged people, when the middle age is defined from the age of 41 to 65. So what are the two things that most predict living a long life in the ages of that? And the two most important things, and there are a lot of things are important: family, children, financial stability, exercise. All of that is important, but those are not the two most important things. And the two most important things, one of them is obvious: no smoking. Smoking is one of the most important things, one of the most important two things that predict longer. And the second thing is having friends. Having friends is critically important to ourselves. Being married and having children, all that's very good. But really what predicts longer is having good friends. And this is something also that we shouldn't forget. You know, there is this isolation, and there is this, we can't go and have coffee and tea with our friends, or play cards, or slap someone's back in Minion, or go out go fishing together. But things can be done, but it has to be done in a creative way. So that challenges us, but it can be done, and sometimes it can be the even more special experiences. So it requires us sometimes to dig deep and to build on it, because people are going through very, very difficult times, but it can be managed in a better way. So we shouldn't project our worries onto our children. We have to deal with it and help them and help our parents deal with it, because our parents and the older generation are going through a difficult time as well, particularly difficult time. And we shouldn't forget them, and we have to deal with it in creative way. And sometimes dealing with our parents or our grandparents in the community means saying, okay, we need to meet and we should continue to meet, but it has to be done in a safe way. And we need to go meet in the parks. You know, in Israel, the schools most of the years are still closed, but now the schools are waking up to see how it's just as important, if not more important, to keep the social aspect of learning and being connected, as the learning and math and science and physics and literature. That's all important, but the social side perhaps is even more important, because they're continuing the Zoom and the classes, but the social side is being missed. So now there are many classes that are meeting out in parks just for a social experience, and the teachers is there to maintain this 2 meters, and each are wearing masks, and that's wonderful and special, and it should be done, and it's unfortunately overdue. Should have been done a long time ago. You keep 2 meters, and both sides are wearing masks in the proper way, you're safe. You know, as a doctor worker, I haven't, fortunately, I haven't lost a beat. I haven't missed a single day of work. Doctors, we haven't missed a single day of work. We go in absolutely every single day since this whole year. We haven't missed in my hospital, we haven't missed a single day of work. And we're sitting in a hospital, and we're right in the middle of Bnei Brak, but the staff is safe. It's safer in the hospital than outside, because in the hospital, we are responsible, and we are keeping 2 meters, and we wear masks. Definitely in psychiatry, it's possible, it's easier, and people are keeping safe. but we're going out into the community as well. And we're meeting with community groups, and we're discussing these issues. And we're saying, you know what? You're right. Some people need to be in hospital when they, and even need to be on respirators and need to get oxygen. But the mental health aspects is no less important right now. And that's something that's going to last a long time. And people are going to take a long time for people to get back. And there's going to be the trauma of this time. And we're seeing a lot of this already. And we're saying, okay, let's prepare us to deal with that already. And what are some of the skills we can engender in ourselves and those around us and those special to us and in the greater community, so that community does not suffer from a long-term perspective.
So what other strategies can we use to help one another, help ourselves with this?
So this is where the creativity comes in. First and foremost, we don't forget to care for the caregiver, and that's us. Each of us need to look after ourselves. We can't look after and care for others if we're not looking after ourselves. And looking after ourselves are the basics of healthy eating, exercise, friends, and then reaching out to others. How can our community, if in the community can be a different way. The community could be a sports club. The community could be your shul. The community could be your book club. Your community could be your card club. You have to find something that you can say, okay, let's focus on that. And how can I deal with this in a better way that can help other people from my strengths? And how can we get together and brainstorm and make this a meaningful, special experience? Because it's easy just to say, okay, let me just go vegetate into my room, into my blanket and my book and my own family, and that's okay. But I think that reaching out can be very good for ourselves, good for those around us because they see us doing special things, and then good for the community out there. And there's so many different things that communities are doing right now. And I'm not just talking about for those who are suffering, because there are many in the community who do have financial stress and are having a difficult time. And for sure, we have to start with them at a community level. We need to reach out to them. But even those who are not necessarily suffering, but who may suffer, or we know that the community is in a need of still being together, because it's going to take time for us to get together again when things slowly start falling into place, when the vaccine starts arriving, please God, soon in the next few months. What have we lost in this time? Things are going to be different. The community is going to be different. Our synagogues, our shuls are going to be different. It's not going to be so easy to get people back. It's not so clear that things are going to go back to where they are. We have to start preparing for that already. The changes are going to be profound.
We've spoken a lot about care in the community, but what about people seeking professional help? I mean, we're 9 months now down into the pandemic. Have you seen any particular rise in referrals in any particular age groups?
Yeah. So, interestingly, during the times of the crisis itself, in the first few months where people were completely overwhelmed and didn't know what was going on, the numbers in the hospitals, the inpatients, went down. People coming to the psychiatrists and the psychologists and social workers in the initial few weeks went down. The numbers went down, and suicide went down. And the numbers, people would think that, suicide's gone up, but it actually went down. And that actually reflects what happens in times of crisis. In a war, during a war, there's the lowest rate of suicide. After the war, it shoots up again. But during a war, people don't kill themselves. And so too, we saw this during the middle of the crisis. Yeah, there was much less suicide, but there's a rebound afterwards and it starts coming back. But I can tell you from my experience and from our peers' experience, the people in people's practices outside the hospital and the clinics is absolutely booming. People are overwhelmed. The anxiety, depression is much more profound. Family issues are are much family stress, family crises. So all of these are things. And these are issues that are absolutely profound. That are, the clinics are overwhelmed. Our clinic in the hospital, we've never been busier. But once again, these are in some ways normal issues that have been accentuated by the crisis. So people have a vulnerability, and then the stress brings it out. The stress accentuates people's difficulty in managing with the crisis. And so we're seeing the usual range of psychiatric disorders, but it's definitely more intensified, and some issues are coming to the fore that weren't there before, but had just been brought out by the crisis. And then it requires a response by the mental health community to deal with it. But this is something that is predictable. But unfortunately, the mental health services around the world did take time for them to deal with it. But now they're getting together. And now I think there's an international awareness of really that these are situations, that this is a real thing that we need to deal with together. So we need to set realistic goals for this time with incremental progress in changing our goals. We need to break, there's a break in monotony, and people's routine has changed, and that throws people off. Everyone needs to find a happy place to be in this time. And that happy place could be, once again, as we discussed, reaching out to the community. That happy place could be, rearranging or reasserting where I want to be in my life and what has this done to me. And it has thrown people off. But people are going to get back. People are going to get back to where, and I think that people will forget this very quickly. But some people are going to be left with some serious scars. And especially, I think that some of the younger generation, who 6 months for them is a lifetime, whereas those in the middle age and the elder age, time goes much quicker, and it's seen in perspective. So 6 months for a 6-year-old is or six months for a 10-year-old is 5% of their life. Where 6 months for a 60-year-old is much less than that. So that's back to this issue of pandemic fatigue. So we basically have to, everyone's challenge for us as parents and children is to engender a sense of self-competence and emotional resilience. Emotional resilience is really what it's all about. Those who went through, and there's research in this. We know that in times of crisis, those who come out the best are not necessarily the strongest. All this research started with the Holocaust. Those who survived and found meaning were not necessarily those who are physically the strongest. We know that those who came from very warm backgrounds and loving backgrounds, and not necessarily the wealthiest backgrounds, and those are the people who on an emotional level appeared to deal better with adversity. And that's the emotional resilience. And if we can engender that in our children during this time, then we've given them perhaps the most important gem for the rest of their life. And not to make better in little situations. This aphorism, if someone's hungry, you give them a piece of fish, and then you'll feed them for a meal. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll never be hungry for the rest of their lives. And it's the same thing now. People who are going through the stress, and if we can help our children deal with stress, and our parents, sometimes our parents need help as well, and sometimes our peers as well. If we can help them deal with adversity, and not just make better in the situation. If someone's having financial stress, we can make better by buying them a meal. But if we can help them develop certain skills, they could help them after COVID as well. And our children, most importantly, if we can help them with various skills in dealing with and coping with adversity, because yes, there is adversity, even though the adversity of COVID for some you cannot compare to the adversity that others have had in many different other situations. But yes, it is a very significant adversity. If we can teach them how to deal with it and develop that emotional resilience and that sense of self-competence in dealing with a crisis, wow, there's nothing better than that we have given our children in terms of in terms of gifts for the rest of their lives.
So, I mean, what signs should one look for to see if children are becoming stressed? Because obviously quite different to adults.
That's a very, very good question. So you have to be sensitive to where those children are. So you'll see that children will withdraw. Children will stop showing interest in any of their classes, whether it be over Zoom or even going to school. Children's previous interests and friends will go down, various activities. Children will lose that zest. And children get anxious, and they won't say they're being anxious, but you'll see it in their behavior. And it takes a sensitive parent to be aware of that and to catch it. Talk regularly, express your love, even if you're not in the same place. Children sometimes have amazing knowledge, for example, how to navigate the technology that's out there for things, and they can help their grandparents. But their grandparents have wisdom that the grandchildren don't have and the children don't have. So even though, for example, the grandparents may lack the ability to navigate between Zooms and all these different kind of technology applications that are out there, they have wisdom, and children and grandchildren are thirsty for that. And there's no better time for that symbiotic relationship to join over this, that the children and grandparents can help with the technology, and their grandparents and the parents can help with wisdom. And that can even be done from a distance. For example, when grandchildren can't come and give their grandparents can't give their grandchildren a hug. So you can do love, you can have love, and love at a sensible distance. It can be done. It's different, but that's the reality. But if children can learn to deal with reality, sometimes it's not something that we wanted, but it's a reality. But let's deal with it. It's wonderful. Let the children know this is only temporary. You see your child in crisis, let them know this is only temporary. And that they'll be able to come back to normal, even though they don't see it. Just validate their feelings. Reassure them that it's okay to feel what they're feeling and to feel frustration. I have a young daughter where every so often she has a breakdown for a minute or two, and we allow her to express what she's saying, and then she gets back into the zip. It never happened. But don't push it away. Don't pretend that it's nothing. It's nothing. Don't worry. It's nothing. It's not nothing. It is a significant stress, and it's okay to express frustration. It's okay to express pain and disappointment with the world and the power figures and authority and loss. Remember Kubler-Ross's stages again: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then at the end, acceptance or resolution, or that this is the way that things are. And people jump between different stages. We can be in denial in the beginning and pretend nothing's really happening, and then get angry, and then be depressed, and then go back to being angry. And so this is just part of what humor laughs about. And some people just skip stages in itself. But everyone's different. The question is, how are we going to be sensitive to other people who are close to us and to help them get over this and come out even in a better place?
Because of the amount of hand washing we're having to do now, or being recommended to do, have you seen an increase in obsessive compulsive disorder as a result of it?
So once again, if someone has a tendency to obsessive compulsive behavior, that's going to be there, and perhaps it could be intensified but that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because that's not really what happens. Because obsessive compulsive disorder is a real disorder, and it's not going to become worse during now. There's definitely the obsessive compulsive personality. Sometimes order is very important for them, and that can become intensified over a crisis like this. But in terms of OCD itself, it just may be more expressed in this way, but if not, it would be expressed in other ways, and it can be very profound. But I don't think that we've necessarily seen so much obsessive it's real obsessive compulsive disorder so much now. We all feel that we become obsessive, and we all constantly, if we're being responsible, on edge, that we initially, especially, I remember people used to buy from the supermarket and wash and wipe and everything. And I'm not so sure how many people are doing that anymore, because I'm not sure whether science really says that's so important as much as it is important when you go shopping to make sure that you're wearing masks properly and you're keeping in the distance. That's much, much more important. So I think that there are things that we in the beginning, when we didn't know, there was so much unknown, and we were so overwhelmed with this sudden crisis that was thrown upon us from nowhere, that people, clutched at everything. But I think that now people are much more sensible about things, and that is everything's on a continuum. And so the question is, once again, how does it affect your behavior? How does it affect your function? So I think in the beginning, to be obsessive about things was a very functional thing and a very correct thing. But the question is, did it affect people's function because it was over? It was too much. And I'm not so sure it was too much for many certain people. And if it was too much, then those people always had that tendency. So I can't say we really saw overwhelming amounts of obsessive compulsive disorder, more than we did before.
We've talked a lot about care in the community, but what about caring for the doctors and the nurses and all your staff in the hospital? Have any special provisions been made for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Initially, I work in a hospital where Mayanei show we 300-400, over 300 beds now, and all departments, and we were right in the middle of Bnei Brak, and we got a lot of attention. People would, from the community would come and we, the doctors were in the beginning, we were very overwhelmed with cases, and many doctors started, from other departments were working in the COVID wards. We had 2 major big wards that we opened up from scratch, including a big tent in the entrance hospital. And there's a lot of attention to the community, and people would be beginning donating pizza and crocs and wine and nuts and perfume and absolutely everything you can think of will being brought to the staff. But the psychiatry hospital, we were right next to it, and we were just like the mentally ill were ignored. It was like, it's a mental illness, people, everything's medical and COVID and medical. And then after about a month, people started waking up and say, hey, there's a psychiatry hospital. They're also working 24 hours a day, and they're also full with patients, but the staff there was forgotten from the community. And then suddenly they woke up to say, okay, what about the mental health? What about the psychiatry staff? And that's the same thing in terms of in general in hospitals around the world. The general hospitals, they look like hotels, and the patients have wonderful conditions. But if you go to psychiatry hospitals around the world, the mentally ill, much of the infrastructure is very much neglected, and patients, are housed in third world conditions in many psychiatry hospitals around the world. I've worked in 6 countries around the world, and every country is just about as being the same. And that because mentally ill don't have a voice, and the mentally ill are put on the side, and there's no reason for that to be like that. Just because someone has mental illness, it doesn't mean that their hospital conditions should be less good or even unfit for living standards compared to what people in medical hospitals, the medical wards are getting. And then people started saying, okay, we need to give attention to the mental health staff as well. And that was a very interesting process for me to see how the country went through that and started becoming aware also from that perspective. But definitely that was an issue. And we in the psychiatry hospital felt a need to go out and to reach into the medical wards because they were stressed. And they weren't talking about this. There wasn't process like we do in the psychiatry hospital over about stress. So we started setting up one-to-one and groups for all the different wards, not just the COVID wards, the staff were dealing with the COVID wards, but also the medical wards and the obstetrics wards and the emergency room who are in the front line. So we had group sessions, and we had stress management sessions, and we allowed the staff, we encouraged the staff to talk about their stress and to talk about their fears of coming to work where everyone else was at home, and their fears of coming to work and perhaps their guilt of bringing the virus home to their families, because everyone was on a lockdown in the beginning, but just the medical staff were coming out, and that was a stress we all were feeling. And parents were leaving their children at home, but they needed to come to work because medical staff was critical to manage, to manage the hospital. But it was stress. So we in the psychiatry hospital, in the psychiatry department, moved out and we had staff running groups, and as I say, one-to-one, and to nip the problem in the bud before it became an issue, and to allow the staff to express, and for us to validate their frustration and difficulties.
Thank you. I have one final question. Time is running short. And that's actually about the elderly who may not have technology, may not have family, don't use the internet. How can we support them during this time?
So we need to intensify connection to the elderly, intensifying grandparenting, and can be done in novel ways. As I mentioned earlier on, I think that virtual time, number one, can be a gift. It's now part of life, and it can be done. And I think that my children have connections with their grandparents who live out the country much more now than they did before, because technology is now so okay, and everyone is so comfortable with it, even the grandparents' generation, because it's become a reality. The elderly should feel that they can still give meaning to the lives of those those younger in their family, and we need to reach out to them and not forget them. The media might be different, and then in novel ways to, as I mentioned, to go out and to meet with the elderly and our grandparents and in the park, because you're allowed to. There's no one says you can't see them. Maybe we can't give them hugs, and maybe we can't scratch their back or do things in the kitchen, cook together because of the closeness. But you can definitely do things outside, and you can definitely meet with them in the garden if you're keeping your 2 meters and you both sides have got masks on. That can be done. It has to be done in a responsible way. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that they are there, and that we need to connect to them, but in a safe way. The aphorism, grandparents may be dying to see their grandchildren, but they should not die to see them. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't see them. It can be done in a responsible way, when we need to do it, and it can be done. And it's true that it's very difficult. And I'll just end with a story. There was once a story I heard when a father went out, when he went overseas, and he disappeared, and those who missed him were missed him. Obviously, his children and his wife missed him the most, and then his friends missed him a lot, but not as much, and then the neighbors, and then the community, and people at work. And so people further and further missed him less. And then after 5 years, he actually came back. And who is the most happy for him to come back? Obviously, those who missed him the most, the wife and the children, and then the friends, and then the neighbors, and the work, and then the community. So I think it's the same thing with COVID. There's certain things that we are missing out on, and certain things we are losing because of this crisis that suddenly descended upon us. But this will pass. The question is, when things come back, missing, it's okay to miss. It's okay to feel longing. It's okay to feel that lack, that we can't give our grandparents a hug, or sometimes our grandchildren, and we can't go out with our friends and do certain things. But if we validate those feelings for ourselves, and we're okay, and we understand, and we say, okay, it's difficult, but we can manage with it, and we're learning ways to deal with it, and we're sharing that, and we're honest with ourselves, and we're being real about it. When things do come back, and they will come back, because we see the bigger picture, they will come back in a few months. Who's going to enjoy that the most? Those who missed it the most. Those who are able to say, I'm being real with myself, and it's very difficult. Those who are saying, I'm really missing my grandchild, and giving them that hug, and I'm really missing my grandparent, and doing those things together like we used to do. But when that comes back, think about the joy and the feeling of fulfillment when one can start doing that again. And that's validating really what we're feeling, and that makes us better human beings. And that's the challenge of this experience, and to develop emotional resilience through this period.
Professor Strous, thank you so much for a very interesting and enlightening and informative presentation. And thank you all for attending this meeting and for your excellent questions. On behalf of the British Friends of Mayanei Hayeshua, I want to wish you all well. I hope you all keep healthy, keep safe, and we look forward to welcoming you at future events. Thank you again and good evening.
Thank you.